real quick, can you go back and hug Julie? I know. I want you to be able to do it. I want you to do it. It's just, oh, yeah, okay. Side hug, that was good. And what do we, okay. Go on back. There's one of those Steeler fans right there. Just give him a hug. Any Buckeye fans here? Let's get to the text, man. I didn't mention anything last weekend. I didn't watch the game because I slept. I was coming back from Missouri, and I didn't watch the game. I still haven't looked at any highlights of Notre Dame and the Wolverines. I don't really want you to talk about it for this year. I'm just struggling a little bit. I don't care. It was Western Michigan. Like, who cares? Oh yeah, that was good. That was against Purdue. That was pretty cool. Mac. So I graduated from Mac school. Okay. Listen. Okay. Really, we're here for Jesus. Let's get centered. Okay. I'm going to read the passage. What I want you to do. We're talking about the temple today. Jesus comes to the temple, and he is going to throw down. Like Jesus, the gentle Jesus that we know from the rest of the book, the Jesus that holds babies, holds lambs, holds puppies and pets them. That Jesus all of a sudden turns into another Jesus. It's the same Jesus, but like when the Pharisees and the scribes and the elders and the teachers of the law would go up to the Galilee and take Jesus on, Jesus was fairly tame, I would say. Like he was tame on his home court, home field advantage. But now he's going to go to Jerusalem, and man, he's going to take them on, okay? He's going to throw down. And so it feels right on the first week of the NFL season to see Jesus be aggressive and bold, kind of like Mike Singletary, or Brian Urlacher, sitting there just waiting for a running back to come through the line. Bam! That's kind of how Jesus is going to do it to the Pharisees this week. And that's fun, right? Okay, and while I'm doing that, I just want you to see part of the temple, and then by the time I'm done reading, I think I can show you where all this stuff would have taken place. I'll start with a passage that we actually read last week, because I think it's really the beginning of this passage. Verse 11 in Mark chapter 11, he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple, and when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. On the following day, when he came from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations,' but you have made it into a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its root. And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses." And they came again to Jerusalem. And as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them?" Jesus said to them, "I'll ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me." And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But shall we say from man?" Well, they were afraid of the people, for they all held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." So you've seen the temple. This is actually the Holy of Holies and the holy place. This is the actual temple. And in the olden days, God's presence would have dwelled right in that place. And then as it pulls back, you'll see what's called the court of the Gentiles. And that's where all of these things would have taken place with Jesus, his disciples, the crowd, the money changers, the dudes that were selling the pigeons. Pigeons are doves, but I like to say doves. It's nicer. But this place is huge. As it pulls back, you'll start to see how very, very large it is. And this is where all the Gentiles and where all the people from very far away could come and hang there. Oh, that's kind of like driving me crazy, isn't it? Okay, there, that's cool. But it was huge. And then that Solomon's porch or Solomon's colonnade, that's where a lot of the teaching took place back in Jesus' day. That's a picture of the whole thing. Solomon's porch is on the front part. That's the southern steps. Those gates still exist, the 2 gates there and the 3 gates, and the little baths, the mikvahs are there. I've been there a number of times. And then around the corner there, that's the Wailing Wall. That's where all the Jews go to pray. And but all of that's gone, right? Because now the Muslims have it, and they have the Dome of the Rock on the top of that thing. That place is enormous. It's like 35 acres. Some people who are farmers, you know what that means. And I go, "What's an acre?" Okay, it's 26 football fields. Okay, now that's huge. Like 350,000 people could be on that platform worshiping God, praying, praising God. Now, the really important part, the Holy of Holies and the holy place, the temple where actually God's presence remained, and then that whole structure, that's like 3 football fields. Just that little part right there is on 3 football fields. So this place is huge. Lots of people can be in there. And so when Jesus comes to that place, you got to understand, it is a spectacle. It's an enormous complex when he shows up there to hang out and to teach the people. And he is going to throw down. And when I say that, do you know what I mean? Like he's going to give them the business, right? He's going to take them out. This is fun. If you like that stuff. Now, were you ever in English class? This is what happened to me in high school, because I didn't love English, grammar and literature and all that. And so you'd read a poem or something, and the teacher would say, now, Steve, tell me the structure of the poem. And structure? I really liked the poem. I thought the poem was really good. It really touched my heart, But structure? Well, I don't understand. What do you mean by structure? I just never got that. And so now when I say this about this passage, that it has structure, I feel like, you're going to look at me like, structure? Yeah, it really does have structure. And it has 5 chunks to this passage. And it's kind of easy to remember. It's in the temple, then a fig tree, the temple, the fig tree, then the temple leaders. And really, the temple leaders they're connected to the temple. And so it's kind of like a Big Mac, It's like 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickled onions, and a sesame seed bun. The sesame seed bun is the top, the temple, and that middle bun, which I've always thought, why can't you take that part out? It tastes so much better when it's not so much bun. But you can't do that on this one, because the temple, that's the most important part of the passage, is that middle part of the bun, that temple right there. And then, of course, you have another all-beef patty. We come back to the fig tree, and we finish with the bottom bun, the temple leaders. And so that's the structure. Just think of Big Mac. Now, do you know what I talked about just there? Do you know that song, the Big Mac? Do you know what a Big Mac is? It makes me feel good. All us old folks, we sang that song since we were, 10, and you look at us kind of like me and the teacher. Structure? No, I don't get that. So anyway, let me kind of walk through this passage, and you're going to see the hamburger kind of take shape, take form, okay? So he enters Jerusalem and goes to the temple. Remember, I talked about this last week, and it was kind of a weird ending, I thought, to the passage, because Jesus has just entered into Jerusalem with this huge parade. It's awesome. It's amazing. And then he gets to the temple, and he just looks around and goes home. Well, here's the funny thing about it. I think it's important because when you start talking about this passage, it's a little strange, right? Have you ever seen Jesus of Nazareth? Some of you are older, maybe you've seen this movie. Because this little passage about Jesus going into the temple and turning over the money changers' tables and getting like, you almost want to think it's violent, right? Like he's impetuous, like he's really angry, just flies off the handle, but that's really not the case, because he's seeing what's going on there, and he literally goes back and prepares to teach them what's going wrong there. And he's very calculated, very structured. Like I said, there's structure. It's like a hamburger. It's set up really well. It's kind of like when you go to like Subway and you get to, it's the cheese and the bread. That's the first stuff, right? And then you put the next thing. Jesus is going to teach them in a way where he shows them something, and then he goes and does something, and then he explains what he did back then and explains how that's connected to it's just an amazing teaching. Jesus is in rare rabbinic form at the end of his life, the last week of his life. You know that Mark spends 10 chapters, 11 chapters talking about the first 3 years of his life, and the last 5 or 6 chapters talk about the last week of his life. So this is really important stuff. And Jesus is in amazing form. He is a master teacher, and a rabbi would just show all these great pictures and images and then connect it to a teaching and scripture, and people, it would just land on them and it would explode in their heart. It's like, oh my gosh, that's what the Messiah is saying? So that's what he's doing here. And that happens with the structure. So he enters Jerusalem, and he goes to the temple, and he looks around at everything, and he checks everything out, and he sees what's going on, and he goes, oh, these guys need help. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. I'm going to go home. I'm going to think through this. I'm going to pray. I'm going to ask God to give me the words and give me the pictures to help my disciples understand what's going on in the temple, to help those leaders know what's going on in the temple so that they will just stop. And so as it's already late, he goes out to Bethany with the 12. And on the following day, they begin the day, they get up, and they're coming back to Jerusalem. So when they come, it says he was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if he could find out anything on it. But when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he says this thing. Now, I don't know if you know anything about horticulture. We're in the early days of spring, so it's like Easter time, early spring. And you know that the trees they leaf a little bit, but usually it's just a bud, and the fruit doesn't come till later in the fall or whatever. And that's the same thing with this fig tree. Oftentimes, fig trees would hold on to old fruit for a season, and so you could actually get old fruit, and it was not all that good, but you could eat it. But the new fruit wouldn't have appeared yet. But this tree doesn't have any fruit. It just has these really big, beautiful leaves, and I think that's an important part of the story, because what he's trying to say is, and a fig tree in the Jewish mind, the imagery of a fig tree is about the covenant relationship with God. It's about how they would follow the commandments and God would bless them. And so it came to be understood as how the leaders were doing, how the people who were leading the Jewish people, how the Pharisees and the scribes and the teachers of the law, how they were living in covenant relationship with God, and so that the nation would be blessed. And it's not being blessed, and that's the whole idea of this fruit. And so Jesus says to the tree, which is kind of weird, right? People don't usually talk to trees. But he does. He says to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. Now, that's an important part of the story, because we're going to go back to it again, right? That's the all-beef patty on the top. We're going to go to the all-beef patty on the bottom and really get this one. Now, I want to show you a little bit of a parable that Jesus has taught, and it probably taught around the same time, but he talked about a barren fig tree. It's interesting. He tells the story kind of like out of the blue, and it's kind of strange, but he says, a man planted a fig tree. And he planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And so he goes to the vine dresser, the guy who's taking care of the thing, and he says, look, for 3 years now. Now, you got to understand, 3 years, what does that sound like? For 3 years, I've been coming to this place, seeking the fruit on the fig tree, and I can't find anything on it. So I want you to cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? It is a waste of even the ground it's planted in. For 3 years, I've been coming to this place, and I can't find any fruit. Do you think the 3 years is important? Like how long did Jesus live, and how many times did he probably go to the temple? Well, he was ministering for 3 years. He probably went to Passover, and he went a number of times, but for 3 years, he was there amongst them, and he would travel from the Galilee down to Jerusalem to the temple to do the things that a Jewish rabbi would do on Passover, on Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah is like right around the corner. That's not that important. Jesus has been with them 3 years. He keeps on coming. He finds no fruit, and he says, just cut it down. Now, the end of the story, at least the parable, is kind of funny because the vine dresser says, oh, no, can you just maybe hold off for one more year? And he says, okay, fine. I'll put some manure around it and see if it bears fruit. Literally, it's in the Bible. Manure. I'm a farmer. No. But Jesus is trying to say, I've been watching you Pharisees. I've been watching the scribes. I've been watching people who are teaching the law, and I don't see any fruit in your lives. And I've come to the temple, and I don't see any fruit. And what I want to do is just cut you down. And I might show some grace. I'm obviously going to go to the cross and die for the sins of everyone. But right now, when I look at your life, I don't see any fruit. See, this is Jesus really giving leaders, religious leaders, the business. And it was funny because I was talking to Josh about it. It's like, you know what? Yeah, you kind of want to, you preach this hard and you want to give, people the business, but it's not really, it's kind of like at us. It's like the leaders, if we're doing wrong or if we're not bearing fruit, we're the ones who God said, I want to chop you down. Now, why is he talking about that? And why is he coming against the leaders? Now, understand, when Jesus does this, the disciples haven't yet gone into this incredibly, I would call, violent show of disapproval. They haven't gone there yet, but they've seen the whole fig thing, and they heard Jesus curse it, and then they go into the temple. And it's like when Jesus comes into the temple, sometimes people think he's like out of his mind, crazy, angry. If you've seen Jesus of Nazareth, has anybody seen that one, the 1969 version, old one? It's kind of a funny scene because Jesus looks crazy. Like he looks out of his mind when they show him doing this. And it's kind of a famous scene in the show. He's come on the donkey, and they've done the whole palm leaves thing, and then he goes into the temple right away, and he's cracking a whip, and he's knocking over the tables, and he's driving people away, and you hear all the money just clanging on the ground. And then there's this famous scene where like the camera's right there, and the temple's behind this Jesus, and he his crazy eyes, you have made my temple a den of thieves. And it's like, Jesus is weird. Is that really what it was like? See, I don't think it was like that. I don't think it was like out of his mind with anger. The Jews understood what it was like when the temple would get a little kind of nasty and disgusting. There had been times in their history when the temple was not doing well, when people were not honoring God with everything. And so there would be people who would come and it was literally called cleansing the temple. Hezekiah was one of the kings. Oftentimes the prophets would speak about, oh man, when you go and you worship, it's not even worship anymore. It's just a bunch of garbage. And so I don't want you to go there. And so there would be prophets who would keep on saying that. And then every once in a while you have a good king who would listen to the prophets, and that was always a good king. They heard the prophets. They went, wait a second, we got to change things here. The temple is not right. And so Hezekiah was like the big one who just came in and purified everything and got everyone doing it right again. But they knew that when the Messiah would come, he would once again cleanse the temple. And from that point on, then, people would worship God with spirit and truth, in fullness of heart, and it would be right. And so when Jesus comes in and doing that, he is once again proclaiming that he's the Messiah. Just like when he came in on a donkey and fulfilled a prophecy, when he goes and cleanses the temple like this, he's once again saying, by the way, if you weren't sure about this one, I'm the Messiah. And this is what happens when the Messiah comes and he finds the temple in disorder. And so they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And this is what it was. This is what happened when people came to the temple from far away. They were not allowed to pay their offerings or their temple tax in the currency that they brought from far away. I don't know if you've ever been to a foreign country where you got to go to that one place and there's usually a bulletproof thing in front of you and you got to change your dollars for whatever you, like there are pesos in the Philippines, which is kind of cool because you give them like $100 and they give you 50,000 pesos. Like, awesome, I got so much. And then you realize, oh, it's just like $100. And they've taken about 15 or 20 of it. You know, they just swipe it. And that's what the people at the temple were doing. People would come with their foreign currency and say, hey, I need these little, there were coins that were minted in Jerusalem, especially for the temple. I need some of those to pay my temple tax. I need to do the offering. I need to buy these things, these pigeons and doves and all that and lambs. And can you change it for me? And they would change it, but they would keep a bunch of it. And so the Sadducees were getting rich off of this thing. If you go to Jerusalem even today, you can go to where the Sadducees live and go down into the kind of deep underbelly of Jerusalem where these Sadducees lived in huge mansions. They ran the temple and they bilked everybody out of their money. Quite an amazing thing, right? And Jesus is not happy about this. He drove out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. What's the pigeons thing about? Well, it was interesting because usually in Passover you would have to offer up a lamb. You know, that you'd buy a lamb or you'd bring a lamb. And usually if you traveled a far distance, you couldn't bring the lamb. And so you bought the lamb when you got there. And then you would go and take the lamb and you would slit its throat and the blood would be shed and it would take care of all your sins. Well, if you didn't have enough money to buy a lamb, if you were poor, you'd have to buy a pigeon. But these people were selling pigeons at inflated prices. So even if you were poor, you would have to buy this pigeon or else your sins wouldn't be forgiven. And so kind of you were desperate. And so they hiked the price up higher and higher. And the poor people have to give up all their money just so they can go before God, break the neck of the pigeon. Sounds kind of gruesome. And be right with God again. And they were forced to do it. And all the while, these people are getting rich off of this. And Jesus says, this makes me sick. It says he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He says, this is got to stop. This is not what God is like. This is not what God's about. He loves people who are outside of the faith. He loves people who are traveling a far distance to commune with him and connect with him. And you're just stealing their money. So he begins to teach the people. And the people are listening to this going, yeah, I'm with him. I don't like having to travel so far and spend all this money. I thought God was different than that. He is different than that, he says. As he's teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. Those are two Old Testament prophecies that are made. And the context of it is kind of interesting. First of all, it's in Isaiah 56, the idea that my house is to be a house of prayer. It's to be a house where we commune with God, we connect with God, we honor God, and his presence falls and we're ministered to. And this passage in Isaiah says, the foreigners who join themselves to God, even those who weren't Jewish, they're foreigners, they're goyim, the pagans, the Gentiles, they would come and say, wait a second, this is the true God. I want to follow him. And so they would allow them to do that. That's why the court of the Gentiles exists. The foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it and holds fast of my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain. That's Jerusalem. That's Mount Moriah. And make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Now, if you know anything about Jesus through the Gospel of Mark, He's always reaching out to those who the spiritual leaders are holding at bay, who are putting obstacles in front of so they can't get to God. And Jesus says, this is going to end with me. This is not going to happen any longer. My house is a house of prayer for all nations. And there's some scholars who say that's the big part that Jesus is saying. It's for all nations. Those of you who are in Jerusalem and think God only cares about you Jewish people, it's not the case anymore. He loves everyone, always. He doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. His love is being poured out to you because of what Jesus has done. So do not hold anyone back. If you see on the little video, you probably didn't see it, there's a little dividing wall between the court of the Gentiles and the Holy of Holies, the temple area. And eventually Paul will say that wall is gone. It's gone. We all can come to God through Jesus. The Lord God, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, declares, I will gather yet others to him besides those already gathered. Jesus is saying there are so many people who need to hear about the love of God. And his people are supposed to be about going out and finding them and telling them and loving them and serving them. And certainly not about taking their money. Oh, is it not written, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers? And he juxtaposed those things. It's supposed to be a house of prayer, a place where you commune with God, and you've made it a place where you just take people's money. Now, luckily, that doesn't happen anymore. That's always the thing that I say when I'm being sarcastic. And I've tried to take the sarcasm out of my voice, which I think I'm doing a good job. My wife's been training me on this one. Usually she does it so that when I talk to police who have pulled me over for speeding, I don't get a ticket. But I'm working on it in other ways too, so that I don't become sarcastic. But that's kind of like sarcasm right there. Have you ever seen Christian leaders who, it seems at least like what they're worried about mostly is about people's money, or people's money being given to the Lord as a seed offering? You send $500 in here and the Lord will bless you. The Lord will bless you and he'll heal you. And I know I do that pretty good. And I guess people can do it. But I think Jesus would say, what on earth are you doing? Now, there's a place where Paul says later in one of his letters, he says, you know what? Even those who do that, who preach the gospel, as long as they're preaching the gospel, as long as they say, you know what? Jesus loves people. He has taken their sin upon himself, and he has freed you from your past and all the sin that you've committed, and he can bring you into a right relationship with God. I mean, Paul says, I rejoice when people say that. I hate it when they do it out of just greedy gain for themselves. And I know that happens in times. And I think, oh, Jesus is so angry with leaders who do that, who make it about money and giving up of something so you can receive this free gift of grace, right? I mean, that's the amazing thing about grace, is it came as a free gift from Jesus. And so it should never be about resources or finances. It was interesting today just because of this passage and what I was going to teach on. And this has never happened to me before. Never. I got here early because I was doing a little construction and I hadn't cleaned up. And so I had to get here early to clean it up. And so I got here about 6 o'clock and pulled up my truck up by the garbage cans out there. And I didn't see this when I drove around the first time. It was kind of dark, I guess. But I came around and went to unlock the door, and there's a dude laying there, like sleeping. It scared me. Oh, whoa. Oh, man, sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Are you okay? And he says, yeah, I'll get going. I said, no, relax. I can make you some coffee. I know we have breakfast food from yesterday morning. If you're hungry, can I do anything for you? Come on in, use the restroom. Or, oh, no, I'm just leaving. No, seriously. I mean, you can come in. Please come in. No, I'm just going to get out of here. It's like, no, you can come in. This is the best place you could ever sleep, because there's like a little thing and the rain didn't hit him, and you can come in and I'll help you. And he scooted off, and I thought, what made his heart first find a place like this to sleep? And then what made his heart be so afraid to get help? And so I just thought, I want to make sure that we're always being generous like that and being ready to give, to help somebody. Last week I wore a shirt, rewriting his story. Yeah, obviously I wore a shirt. I don't know, but a specific shirt, rewriting his story, and it was to raise money for the pregnancy center. And I told you that I had to raise $500 or else I would have to wear this, and my wife really doesn't want that to happen. I'd have to wear it forever. And you guys, were very generous, and you gave $1,700. And so I just want to thank you for that. I don't smell today. And you bless some people who are going through difficult times. And so I love the fact that we're there right now, that we're generous, that we realize the important stuff, and we give to that, and we don't worry about other things. And so I just hope that a guy just came out with a book, talked about spiritual leaders often drift. And I heard that loud and clear. It's like, no, I want to stay very focused on the right stuff, about making sure that we're reaching out to those who are hurting, who are lost, who need to hear about the incredible love of Jesus. And this is what Jeremiah says, that little part about being a den of robbers that comes out of Jeremiah chapter 7. And the same sort of context is around that verse. It says, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you do not oppress the sojourner, basically somebody who's traveling, or the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own harm. And he continues to talk about, if you will just quit doing the things that are wrong, if you would just honor me in this place, then you would never have to leave this place. It would always be available to you. God's presence would always be there for you. But has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? He's talking to leaders who are saying, you just seem to be able to take people's money and not care about them, to not actually help them connect with the God that they're searching for. And Jesus is really, really angry about this. And that's what he's saying here. He's taking it out on the spiritual leaders of his day. And so we all need to listen to those things and say, we never want to go down that road. And so the chief priests who he's talking to and the scribes heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. Why? Because when people said, yeah, I don't think you should steal our money anymore so that we connect with God, they liked that. Yeah, and the scribes were like, uh-oh, this guy is speaking truth into their life, and they're beginning to believe it. And this is a problem, and so they want to destroy him. So evening comes, they go out of the city. This is the middle bun, right? And now we're going to the lower patty, the lower all-beef patty. They passed by in the morning, they saw this fig tree withered away to its root. And Peter, of course, whoa, look at that. Did you see that? That fig tree that you cursed, it's completely withered from its root. It is brown, it's crusty, it's ready to burn. That thing was leafy green before. It looked good, and that's the idea of these priests and those Pharisees and the scribes. They look good walking around the temple, They got their long, flowy robes and their big tassels and their tall hats, and they're real cool, and they look really good, but they are dead inside. And that's what he says, this fig tree that you curse, oh my gosh, it's gone. It is brown and crunchy and ready to die. You just cut it down. And it's funny because Jesus says, yeah, I want you to have faith in God. Never put your faith in a leader. They're human. Trust only in God. He's the one who won't let you down. People will always let you down. And then he talks about prayer. And it's funny because a lot of times guys who say, just send in your $500 and the Lord will bless you. The Lord will bless you beyond belief. I don't know why it's always Southern. They will take this passage out of context. The context is Jesus saying, I'm sick of you trying to take money from people to get them close to God. You're just robbers. You're thieves. And they'll take this passage and use it completely different. Jesus says, truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown to the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. It's kind of interesting. I don't have time to say this, but I'll do it anyway. Herod the Great, when he was like in power, there was a place, he wanted to build a palace about 20 miles south of Jerusalem, but he wanted to be able to see Jerusalem, the temple and the whole temple complex that he had built. He wanted to see that from his palace. And so he, on the backs of slaves, he literally moved a mountain, a big mountain. I mean, just moved it so that he could build his palace on top of it so he could see Jerusalem from where he built his palace. I mean, this literally happened within a generation of Jesus speaking about it. So it's like, you know, the people in power, they like get slaves and they destroy their lives and they do all this stuff. All you have to do is ask God. God is that powerful. He is so much more powerful than Herod the Great or any leader, any political leader, any spiritual leader. He is more powerful than anybody you could ever imagine. All you have to do is say the word, poof, and not doubt, but believe in your heart that it will come to pass and it will be done for you. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Have you ever doubted in prayer? I was down listening to a guy talk about doubt recently, and it's just so, oh my gosh. Like if you don't struggle with doubt, I'm not sure you have faith at times, like for myself. I mean, I know that I have faith because there are moments when I'm doubting and then it changes. And the Lord does something and I go, oh, he can be trusted. And I stop doubting for a time. And I don't know if you've ever been in those moments of doubt where it's like, I don't think God's going to show up here. And to come to a place where you go, okay, but I trust him even in this. Oh, it's such a great place. I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. And then he says something else, which I think is probably the most important thing in prayer. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. So this is about prayer, right? It's about trusting God and it's about forgiving. Now, if we haven't seen that through Jesus' teaching up till now, this is clear. Man, you just release people. You just don't hold anything. I mean, that's what the religious leaders were all about, holding something, their sin against them. Holding those outcasts, oh, they did something wrong, and so we're not going to be with. No. When you're coming to God, you just forgive everyone. You just release them, and you'll have that kind of forgiveness from God. And so that's kind of the second all-beef patty, right? I mean, that's kind of the cool part. And then they came again to Jerusalem. They came to the temple, and he was walking in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to me. And this is just funny. Like Jesus this is the end. It's like, you know what? I ain't going to deal with you anymore. They said to him, hey, by what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them? And Jesus says, let me ask you a question. Answer me, and I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? Answer me. Now remember, Jesus came after John. John the Baptist was the first on the scene. And he said, there's coming after me somebody who's so amazing. I mean, you can't even stoop down and untie his sandals. He is the Messiah. He is the one who's going to take away the sins of the world. He's coming. I'll baptize you after you confess your sins, but he's going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit, with fire. He is the real deal. And they went out and they didn't like what he said. And Jesus came and was baptized by John. And now here Jesus is bringing him up again. And they're going, oh, why do you have to bring him up again? We didn't like him the first time. And so he asked him, so by what authority did John get it? Was it from heaven or from men? Was it from God himself or from people? And they went, if we say from heaven, he's going to say, I know he's going to say, then why didn't you believe him? Why don't you believe me? Why don't you understand that I'm the Messiah? I've shown you in so many different ways. And so they go, no, we can't say that, because then he'll come back at us and we'll lose the argument. But if we say from man, then all the crowd will hate us, because the crowd really does believe that John was a prophet. And so they come to Jesus and they say, I can't say that second part. How gutless is this? How gutless as a leader is this? I mean, when it's put right in your face, I mean, just this is a freebie. Own up. Own up and say, I was wrong. I was wrong. It's a great place to lead from. I was wrong. God's right. I was wrong. But they don't do it. We don't know. Well, then neither will I tell you whose authority I do these things. But you know he was saying, you realize, don't you, that I've come from God, that I'm doing exactly what the Messiah was called to do. I've come, and the 4 signs that you knew were going to take place, that I was going to heal a leper, that I was going to restore sight to a blind man from birth, that I was doing all these things, and that I was going to cast out a demon from a mute person, and then the last one, the Lazarus, that I was going to raise somebody from the dead after 3 days. All those things have happened. I've come into your temple on a colt just like the Messiah was supposed to. I've come and cleansed your temple just like the Messiah. You don't like my message because it ruins your gig. But that's who I am. Jesus throws down, and these spiritual leaders don't fess up, don't surrender their hearts. Oh, my hope and prayer is that you will see Jesus for who he is, that you will fully surrender to him and realize his mission that he has called us to is so grand that it goes to the 4 corners of the world, that it goes right to the stoop here at this church, that as it goes into the inner city and goes to faraway lands, that it's about seeing everyone come to know that God is for people, that he has sent his son Jesus, that Jesus has come, he is the Messiah. He's gone to the cross, taken sin upon himself, and has freed anyone who trusts in him from their sin. They can know God. You don't need a temple for that any longer. The Holy Spirit will come and reside in you, and you commune with him anytime you want. That's what Jesus has done. We stand for closing prayer.